Started from a DM, now she wanna see him. If you wanna link, baby, gotta be the weekend. Just follow me. Just
Oh, I'm sorry. I was watching that Michael Jordan Last Dance, the ESPN special. I got that ESPN Plus, so I'm watching it on the playback when I got time. You feel me? So, what I wanted to talk about in this particular video is why I feel that it is acceptable for black people to hold on to one kind of pain, but we must let go of another. I'm going to explain to you what I mean. We are allowed to hold on to the pain of loss. We are allowed to hold on to the pain of being, what's the word I'm looking for? Hopeless. We can hold on to those pains. But we cannot hold on to the pains associated to our ancestry. If we talk about how slavery is impacting us today, well, you weren't a slave. Your parents weren't slaves. How can slavery be impacting you? Well, let's think about it this way. I turned 30 this year. I am, I believe, 3 generations removed from slavery. Maybe 4. I'm going to look more into it. My grandmother grew up during a time, civil rights movement, all of that. She grew up a little before it, lived through it. She dealt with it. But then you have her parents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. Now, if my grandmother lived through the civil rights movement, all right, if my my mother and my aunties and my uncle, 70s, 60s, these are times that they lived through. My grandmother, 50s, 40s. I'm not saying my grandmother was born in the 40s, by the way. What I'm saying is, if my grandmother was an adult at the time my oldest auntie was born, then her childhood would have took her through some of the worst period of history for black people outside of slavery. So my great-grandparents would have either been the children, possibly grandchildren of slaves, because it is depending upon, where my family would have been held, the possibility of them having been freed earlier. However, my family comes from Mississippi and Alabama. So, even if I look at it on my grandfather's side, I am at absolute most 5 generations removed from slavery. My mom, my grandma, my great-grandparents, great-greats, and my great-great-greats. That is the absolute most I could be separated. The absolute least amount of time that I could be separated are my great-grandparents. I'm positive. Well, I'm not going to say positive. I've never asked, but I believe they were not. But could they have been born slaves? And it's very much possible. But that pain we are not allowed to hold on to. We are told to forget and move on from that, despite the fact that that pain is very much something that we have to deal with on a regular basis. To this day, slavery does impact the black community. in ways that a lot of people don't want to admit, they don't want to see. I'm sure you've heard prison industrial system. It was literally derived from the idea of we can't let these niggas be free. So, first thing they did when slaves were set free is they made it illegal to be homeless. Because then you could legally make them slaves again by putting them in jail. So they were homeless. Oh, it's illegal to be homeless. Let's go put you in this prison. While you're in this prison, you're not a human, you're a slave again. That is what that system was born of. And then you have the school to prison pipeline. Schools are even set up very similar to prisons. All of this is because slavery does still affect our community to this day. We are told to get over it and to act as if it did not bother us, it did not happen, because it did not happen to us. But my grandmother lived through horrible times. My mother lived through horrible times. My father lived through horrible times. Not because they were slaves, but because their grandparents and great-grandparents were. Because they looked like me. Because they looked like a lot of you who are going to see this video. But we have to let it go and move on. They don't tell this to Jewish people about the Holocaust. They're allowed to remember that. They're allowed to mourn everyone who was lost. They were even given reparations, some of them, by Germany. America's never going to give us reparations. But the least America could do is to not try to act like it didn't happen. Don't try to sweep it under a rug. Don't tell us to get over it and let it go. Because you know what? We could let that pain go if the church bombings didn't happen. The bombing of Black Wall Street didn't happen. If every time we try to be better, you didn't try to put your foot on our neck and hold us down. It's easy to let go of pain if the pain stops. But if you keep connecting old pain to new pain, how can we let go? How can we move on? How can we think of something new? How can we stop hurting from one thing if while grieving that we're hurt by something else? Think about how they like to tell us all cops aren't bad cops. And my auntie was a cop. And I believe all cops are not bad cops. But I also believe that if you are a good cop, but you let your partner do some not so good things, then you're just as much a part of the problem. That brotherhood of the badge is BS. Hold your people accountable. See, y'all come into the black community and y'all ask why black people don't snitch. It is not always out of fear of what that person might do to us or our family. Sometimes it's because, why should we tell you? Do you tell anybody when the guy next to you in that blue uniform does something wrong? No, you don't. You have a brotherhood. You have a connection. Well, we do too. And it's misguided sometimes. But if we don't try to look out for each other, nobody will. And the fact is we try to. Some of us do, some of us don't. Gangs didn't come from a place of evil intent. Their original purpose was to protect our neighborhoods. That was corrupted. Money, drugs flooded into them. Then they started fighting over territories they didn't own. This is my block. It's not your block. The city owns that block. It could have been your block. There were times when gangs owned property. Then you think about the uncorruptible ones. Things like the Black Panthers. They just out and out killed them. So while telling us to get over slavery, and then telling us to get over all of the other atrocities, and telling us to get over what the police are doing, you're telling us to get over it without giving us time to grieve for it. It's not proper. It's not okay. And we can't. No other community was told to just let go. When the Japanese were put into internment camps during World War II, they were not told to just get over it afterwards. America gave them reparations for internment camps. because it was unfair treatment to those people. And I'm not saying they shouldn't receive those reparations. I'm saying, why don't we receive them too? Why is our pain unjustified in the eyes of white people, of some black people? See, you feel like we're blaming slavery for our current predicament. I said the wrong word. We're not blaming slavery. We are pointing out the beginning of a story. Or shall I say the beginning of one of the worst chapters in the history of our people. Because our story doesn't start here as slaves. If you look at a lot of native tribes, a lot of the older ones, they looked like us. If you go to Asia and you find a lot of the indigenous people, they look like us. If you go to Australia, you find the indigenous people, they look like us. Funny thing, the indigenous people of Australia were not even considered human. For years, they were considered plants. That doesn't even make sense. But they look like us. But the indigenous people who look like us are always moved. History's rewritten. Power stripped. Ideologies destroyed. Black people love to speak about Egypt and its pharaohs. Some people call it Kemet. I call it Egypt because everyone would know what I'm talking about. Some people also call it Kushite, which is actually a different kingdom. Egypt was one of many kingdoms that our people came from. And realistically, most of us who might be derived from African slaves, because believe me, every African American who is derived from a slave is not the ancestor of an African. I want you to understand that. Some native tribes were enslaved. Some of us are the ancestors of the native people of this country. We are not all from Africa. I might be, I might not be. I could be both, because they definitely intermingled. But Egypt was one of many kingdoms. One. And they don't even like teaching us that it's part of our heritage. Granted, most of us could not be the descendants of Egyptians. Why? Egypt is on the other side of Africa than where they would have actually been picking the slaves up. So while some of us could be distant relatives and descendants of Egyptians, majority of us are not. But Egypt was one kingdom. Africa had more kingdoms, more kings, more emperors, empresses, warriors than any other continent. So warring nation is what it was. But they did not war for the sake of war. They had reasons. That's where our story begins. And then it's interrupted by one of the worst chapters in the history of our people, slavery. Not only is our history interrupted by this, but then we're told in our current generation, pretend that didn't happen. Act like it wasn't real. Let it go. It didn't affect you. That didn't affect your mother. Were you a slave? Were you there? So you're going to tell me, successful white man, that your people aren't better off? No. Are you going to argue that there were white slaves? The indentured servants who served a set amount of time to pay off a debt. Very few had to actually work their entire lives. And then they were set free with money that they had earned. Were your people killed because they wanted to read? Did your people have to hide their intelligence and hide the most intelligent people that they had out of fear? were your people forced to make children with their own parents? Because that did happen. They took really healthy black men and a healthy black woman who might have even been his mother. They didn't care, and they bred them. They bred us. It upsets me that we aren't allowed to grieve anything but death. Because there are other things that need to be grieved in our history other than death. There are many things that also need to be celebrated in our history other than Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Soren Jr. Plenty of things. How's my son? Being bad. But I love him. Want to see I can't? Okay, I'm back. But like I said, there are many things that we need to celebrate. Other than Martin Luther King, other than Malcolm X, other than Marcus Garvey. We need to celebrate our survival. Now, I was not always super into this type of stuff. And it bothers me. I wish I was. I wish I was always into this. I wish I always knew my history and my people. And this is going to be a video longer than I usually would be trying to make early on my YouTube. But I want you to understand, I am a black man. And every day I leave my house, I have to wonder, hope, pray, and worry that I can be killed by another black man who's lost, confused, doing what he thinks he needs to survive, or by a cop who fears me because I look intimidating to him. But I look intimidating to him because his ancestors bred mine. You bred us to be bigger, stronger, faster, and more aggressive. And now you fear us because of it. Okay. That's terrible. I'm pretty sure I'm going to cut this video in half and actually make it 2 videos. I'm positive of that. So, what I wanted to say is, because I got off topic a little bit. The reason I feel like we are allowed to grieve death, to mourn death, and celebrate very, very specific things. One, it's because of a connection to Christianity, a religion not of our people. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that by being a Christian, you are wrong. I'm going to tell you, look at the history of that religion and tell me that it's done more good than bad. Because there's our millions of people who have been killed in the name of that religion who will disagree. And then the one other religion that it is okay for us to hold, being Muslim, Islam, the Nation of Islam, a religion extremely flawed in and of itself in America. Farrakhan has done incredible things, great things, but he could have done more. And many, many before him outside of the nation could have done more. I am not angry at Farrakhan for anything. He has done what he felt was necessary for his people to survive, for him to survive, and for his family to survive. But see, those two religions we can have. But we cannot be Jewish. Maybe there are black Jews. I'm not going to say we can't be. But even if there are black Jewish people, there are very few of them. Even though the Hebrews would have been not Middle Eastern, they would have been North African. At that point, there were no Middle Eastern people. They were North Africans. They were black. Those two religions are very close to each other. Similar in many, many ways. Belief structure, even who they believe in. That whole Allah is a different God. You're kind of an idiot. It's literally how you say God in a different language. Stop believing things just because people tell you. Look it up. Research it, man. But again, the reason we can mourn these things, one is the connection to these religions. Religion is one of the easiest ways to control a mass of people. One of the other easiest ways is finances. Financially, the black dollar holds up the U.S. economy like no other. Oh, I promise you, if black people decided, I'm not spending any money for 1 week, this economy would completely collapse. We are forced to spend and told that we are not allowed to mourn our ancestors. Why? Not just the slaves, but why can I not mourn my ancestors? Why is it that schools don't just have African studies as an alternative to American history? Why is African history not just an alternative? British history is a course in some high schools. I took British history. I don't know why. Then you have British literature. Why isn't there a course fully explaining the true history of music? First rock band, black. Blues, jazz. Classical instruments were derived from African instruments. Not to mention that some of the best classical musicians, Beethoven, Mozart, have been proven to have used other people to write some of their music. They were poor people, took care of them, and when they died, so did the truth. Guess what some of those poor people turned out to be, though? African descent. It's crazy. We have so many things to celebrate, so many things to mourn, so many things to learn, and so many things to unlearn, but we are not allowed to. Being black is a weapon. I didn't say that. I didn't make it that way, but it is. If I get stopped by the police, I might die. That's what it is. That is something I have to live with every time I leave the house and every time the police stop me. I could die. Every time that I leave the house and I see a young man outside yelling, arguing, and he reaching his hood, I could die, and I don't even have anything to do with it. That's something I have to deal with. A fear that I have to maintain and muster through. Because I can't stay home. I have a family to take care of. One of the things we need to mourn is the old black family. It is gone and it hurts, but it is gone. And I wish it wasn't. What I think is a fix for this, I don't know. I think we need to talk about and accept these issues. Slavery is not what's affecting us now, but slavery is one of the root causes of all the other things that is affecting us. There's a saying that if you are black, you must be twice as good as your white counterparts to be considered before you're passed over. I have to be twice as good to gain consideration, and I might still be passed over. You know how we guarantee not being passed over? We have to be 5 times better, 10 times better, 20 times better. We have to be the absolute best at whatever we do. Who can live with that stress?